Chapter 16 Practical Examination and Preparation for Flight Review Introduction. The instructor must be able to prepare the student for a practical examination as well as the flight review. Documentation. Every instructor must have a thorough understanding of Title 14 of the Code of Federal Regulations, 14 CFR, Part 61. For instance, 14 CFR Part 61, Section 61.3, provides information on certificates, ratings, and authorizations. Prior to recommending the student pilot for the practical examination or prior to conducting a flight review, the student must have documentation of experience and training requirements. Part 61 also provides regulatory guidance for the requirements and documentation needed for the knowledge test, 14 CFR Section 61.35, practical test, 14 CFR Section 61.39, and flight review, 14 CFR Section 61.56, as well as other pertinent information. Requirements differ, therefore, it is important for the instructor to become familiar with the prerequisites for the specific training and test to be conducted. Documentation for each type of certificate generally includes current student or pilot certificate, medical certificate appropriate for the rating sought, instructor's endorsement to take the practical exam, experience requirements, airman's application form, and photo identification. Preparing the student. A student pilot is likely to be anxious and apprehensive when preparing for the knowledge test, practical exam, and flight review. Help the student understand the process and intent of each. Last training flight. The last few training sessions should attempt to mirror what is to be expected during the actual academic or flight evaluation. Replicate the evaluation, and allow the student to perform all maneuvers or discuss all subjects without assistance. This should provide the student with confidence going into the evaluation. Describe the difference between a FAA inspector and designated pilot examiner, DPE. Remind the student that each evaluator has different techniques, but that the same standards apply regardless of the evaluator. Application and testing preparation. Assist the student by walking them through the application process and explaining what is to be expected at the testing locations. Questions such as how long the test will be, what to bring, what items they may need to bring are most common. Several FAA websites are available to help the student prepare for the exam or flight review process. http://www.fa.gov/training_testing/ provides a list of resources and guides to help the student. http://www.fa.gov/pilot/testing/ provides testing information and locations. http://ov.info.fa.gov/designee-search.asp provides a directory for pilot examiners. Preparation for a practical exam training. As previously discussed in earlier chapters, the academic and flight training leading up to this point should have scenarios included. These scenarios start with basic fundamentals and develop into more complex and comprehensive task-integrated scenarios. In addition to teaching specific maneuvers and knowledge required for the exams, a large part of ensuring a pilot is ready for pilot in command (PIC) duties is developing the student's ability to exercise good judgment and mature decision-making skills. A scenario-based flight training program should provide the student with the skills and knowledge necessary to meet or exceed the standards outlined in the Practical Test Standards, PTS, found at http://www.fa.gov/pilot/testing for the rating being sought. The PTS is published by the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, to establish the standards for the practical test and pilot certification. FAA inspectors and designated pilot examiners, DPE, conduct practical tests in compliance with these standards. Flight instructors and applicants should find these standards helpful during training and when preparing for the practical test. By incorporating the PTS into scenario-based instructional programs, instructors can ensure the student not only meets or exceeds the standards but understands the practical application of those standards. An instructor should not recommend a student for the practical exam unless the student has demonstrated both the knowledge and the skills required to meet the PTS. The instructor should not use the PTS as a training document because the PTS contains only the minimum standards to meet to obtain a certificate. Training that only meets the minimum standard of the PTS is poor training. Instructors should determine the student's goals and focus the training towards those goals, developing training that challenges the student to exceed the minimum standards. Flight review. The flight review is not a test, but rather a mandated opportunity to receive updated information and instruction concerning the national airspace system, the aircraft to be used during the instruction, safety policies, and procedures. Additionally, the flight review is an instructional service designed to assess the pilot's knowledge, skills, and proficiency. For more in-depth discussion of the conduct of flight reviews, refer to Conducting an Effective Flight Review, a downloadable PDF handbook available at www.fa.gov. FAA Advisory Circular, AC 61-98, Currency and Additional Qualification Requirements for Certificated Pilots, and 14 CFR Part 61, Section 61.56, Certification, Pilots, Flight Instructors, and Ground Instructors. Appendices in these documents include such items as a sample flight review plan and checklist, a sample list of flight review knowledge, maneuvers and procedures, and personal minimums worksheets. Figure 16.1. It should be noted that in a flight review, the two possible outcomes are a sign-off in the logbook for successful completion or an opportunity to return and practice more to regain or sharpen certain aircraft skills. There is no possibility of failure in a flight review. At the conclusion of a successful flight review, the logbook of the pilot should be endorsed as recommended by AC 6165, Certification, Pilots and Flight and Ground Instructors. Figure 16.2. The purpose of the flight review is to provide for an independent evaluation of pilot skills and aeronautical knowledge. According to the regulation, it is also intended to offer pilots the opportunity to design a personal currency and proficiency program in consultation with a certificated flight instructor, CFI. In effect, the flight review is the aeronautical equivalent of a regular medical checkup and ongoing health improvement program. The conduct of flight reviews for certificated pilots is a responsibility of the flight instructor, and is also an excellent opportunity for the instructor to expand his or her professional services. The flight review is intended to be an industry-managed, FAA-monitored currency program. As stated in 14 CFR Part 61, no person may act as pilot in command, PIC, of an aircraft unless a flight review has been accomplished within the preceding 24 calendar months. Effective pilot refresher training must be based on specific objectives and standards. The objectives should include a thorough checkout appropriate to the pilot certificate and aircraft ratings held, and the standards should be at least those required for the issuance of that pilot certificate. Before beginning any training, the pilot and the instructor should agree fully on these objectives and standards, and, as training progresses, the pilot should be kept appraised of progress toward achieving those goals. A flight review is an excellent opportunity for an instructor to review pilot decision-making skills. To get the information needed to evaluate aeronautical decision-making, ADM skills, including risk management, give the pilot multiple opportunities to make decisions and ask questions about those decisions. For example, ask the pilot to explain why the alternate airport selected for the diversion exercise is a safe and appropriate choice. What are the possible hazards and what can the pilot do to mitigate them? Be alert to the pilot's information on automation management skills as well. For example, does the pilot perform regular common sense cross-checks? For more ideas on generating scenarios that teach risk management, visit www.fa.gov. In addition to the required maneuvers conducted during the flight review, flight instructors should also review and discuss those special emphasis items listed in the Flight Instructor PTS. Who needs a flight review? Pilots require a flight review every 24 months, with the following exceptions. 1. A person who has a pilot proficiency check conducted by an examiner, an approved pilot check airman, or is in the U.S. Armed Forces, for pilot certificate, rating, or operating privilege. 2. A person who has satisfactorily completed one or more phases of an FAA-sponsored pilot proficiency award program. 3. A student pilot need not accomplish the flight review provided that student pilot is undergoing training for a certificate and has a current solo flight endorsement as required under 14 CFR Part 61, Section 61.87. 4. A person who has passed the required PIC proficiency check under 14 CFR Part 61, Section 61.58, or Part 121, 135, or 141. 5. A person who holds a current flight instructor certificate and has satisfactorily completed renewal of a flight instructor certificate under the provisions of 14 CFR Part 61, Section 61.197, need not complete the 1 hour of ground training listed under the requirements of the flight review. Flight Review Requirements 14 CFR Part 61, Section 61.56 stipulates that a flight review must contain at least 1 hour of ground instruction and 1 hour of flight instruction. The instruction must include a review of the general operating and flight rules of 14 CFR Part 91 and a review of those maneuvers and procedures that, at the discretion of the instructor giving the review, are necessary for the pilot to demonstrate the safe exercise of the privileges of the pilot certificate held. Figure 16.3 Instructors should tailor the review of general operating and flight rules to the needs of the pilot being reviewed to ensure the pilot can comply with all regulatory requirements and operate safely. Flight instructors need to keep in mind that a flight review can only end with a biennial flight review endorsement or dual given. There are no failures on a flight review. Preparation for the flight review. The flight review gives pilots the opportunity to ride with a flight instructor of their own choosing for an appraisal of their flying skills and proficiency, and to get further assistance and guidance in any areas in which they are deficient. Accident rates suggest that, among other things, some instructors administering flight reviews may not sufficiently recognize and correct poor pilot technique or decision-making capabilities. Since the maneuvers and procedures performed are at the discretion of the instructor giving the review, it is important that instructors adequately prepare for the review. The instructor can make the most of a flight review by beginning with an interview of the pilot to determine the nature of his or her flying and operating requirements. Ask the pilot what he or she wishes to refresh or relearn. This helps the pilot become motivated and to accept the flight review evaluation. AC 6198 suggests some of the elements to consider during this interview. Flight instructors should take into consideration the typical flight areas of the flight review pilot and attempt to tailor the review towards their expected hazardous conditions and maneuvers. For example, if flights are in high elevations, then particular attention should be focused on high-density altitude flight planning and mountain flying to include box canyons. Flight instructors should also be aware of the local accident rate and causative factors. Model or type of helicopter flown. For the purposes of giving a flight review, the regulations do not require an instructor to have any minimum amount of time in a particular make and model of helicopter. To ensure the review is safely conducted within the operating limitations of the helicopter to be used, it is a good idea to be familiar with the helicopter. An instructor conducting a flight review must hold a category, class, and, if appropriate, the type rating on the pilot certificate, as well as a category and class rating on the flight instructor certificate appropriate to the aircraft in which the review is to be conducted. Nature of flight operations. An instructor giving a flight review should consider the type of flying usually done by the pilot before deciding how to conduct a review. Most pilots may want to review only emergency procedures, but other pilots may want to concentrate on areas of operation in which they lack experience or feel deficient. Special Federal Aviation Regulation No. 73 SFAR 73 has additional requirements for pilots to act as pick-in Robinson R-22 or R-44 helicopters. To act as pick-in either of these helicopters, the pilot must complete the flight review in the specific model helicopter. Recency of flight experience. The instructor should review the pilot's logbook to determine total flight time and recency of experience. This allows the instructor to evaluate the need for particular maneuvers and procedures in the flight review. Pilots who have not flown in several years may require an extensive review of the basic maneuvers and a more extensive review of 14 CFR Part 91, as well as airspace and other operating requirements. More experienced and current pilots may want to review advanced maneuvers. Regardless of flight experience, the flight review should include all areas the instructor deems necessary for future safe operations. Chapter summary. This chapter discussed the instructor's role in a student pilot's preparation for a practical examination. It also outlined recommended procedures for conducting a flight review.